Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Welcome to the show. Welcome. You know, today we're going to be talking about a person's will to fight and stay alive. What have you really fought for, or what have you survived? While many are fighting to survive the loss of a mate or a child, others are trying to stay alive financially or recover from the emotional stress caused from a wrong done by another. Today we have entrepreneur and author of the highly anticipated book, 2 Million Tears, Joseph T. Mongray on the show. Unbelievable story. We also have entrepreneur and real estate guru, Amy Norris will be stopping by. Tell us what's happening. This is a very special episode because you're going to be hearing from about an incredible true survival story of a child living in the jungle and overcoming the harshest of conditions. Whether you're looking to be inspired in your business or personal life, I promise this feel-good story will leave you speechless. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome, welcome to the show. I'm joined by my dear friend Ian. Ian, how are you?
I'm fabulous. How are you, Joe?
I'm doing great, fellow pilot and fellow like I know how to fly. I've been up once, I think I know how to fly. But how's things been going for you, okay?
Yes, really, really busy. Really busy, but you know, that's always a good thing they say in business, so.
If you're not busy in business, you're either moving forward or you're moving backwards. No one's really staying their ground, so,
yeah,
that's good to hear.
It is a good thing, yeah, and so many things are happening. We'll save that for another time.
Yeah, well, I'm glad because we talked before the interview. There's so much to cover in such a short amount of time tonight, and the story that we're going to be talking about today, I have to say that I kind of knew the story over the last, really a year this thing has kind of been out there, and I think there's almost speculation of like, could this even be true? Because it's that kind of story. But this morning over breakfast, I kind of got the real scoop. And I have to say, all day, I've kind of been in this fog because it's like, it's just shocking of survival. It's a true survival story.
Yeah, a lot of
and I know they filled you in a little bit as well.
Yeah, a lot of the time you hear the really exciting part, and then the rest is just around it.
Right.
It seems like everything I've heard today is just more enthralling than the last piece of information.
Yeah, and from what I understand, it's gotten so much traction that there's a trilogy of books coming out, and they're already actually starting to write scenes for scripts. In fact, I haven't even told my crew this, but a few weeks ago we interviewed David Winters, the Hollywood producer, and he's responsible for films like West Side Story, and I mean, worked with Paul Newman. He did 4 Elvis movies, and I actually, on the way here, talked to some of his crew. I gave him like 4 stories, little tip, and he was already like, I'm definitely interested. How can we have a meeting? I mean, that's the kind of power this has, and I can foresee not only a trilogy of books, but films, and really, really amazing. Before we get to that, though, we are going to be joined briefly by somebody I think you know, real estate guru and entrepreneur, Amy Norris, everybody.
Hey, Dan.
Hey, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing super fantastic. Amy, we actually saw, I was going to say we haven't seen each other in so long, but I actually saw you yesterday at a friend's house, and they were, I mean, the spread there, I got to say that I almost called you guys and say, can I stay over? Because I know you live close, and I ate more yesterday than I have in probably 2 weeks. But how have you been? How's business?
Business is absolutely fantastic. The market seems to be creeping up. There's still a few good deals out there. There's still a few short sales and foreclosures that are trickling out there. But one of the things I wanted to talk about today, especially now that it's summertime and people are renting, is how to protect yourself as a renter, because I could tell you I've had a few of my properties where there's a lot of fraud out there where what people do is they copy my pictures from my listings, and then they'll try to rent out the property, and so we won't even know of those sites existing, but someone will call me, and like today I had one. They said, oh, your beautiful home here in Orange Beach, some guy from England is going to try to rent it to me, and I said, oh, no, that's not legitimate because it's not rented.
Unless my husband is doing something I don't know about.
Yeah, it wasn't him. It wasn't him.
Yeah.
So just make sure that you would probably need to Google the property address. And if it is represented by a large rental company, I probably would recommend that first.
Yep.
Or just do your research. If it's for sale, you might want to call the realtor or the agent before you deal with a rent by owner, because you might just be sending your money to somebody who knows how to copy and paste pictures.
Right. Yeah, and I love having you stop by because you're one of those entrepreneurs that really has, you know, your finger on the pulse of what's going on. I know that your web presence and you kind of dominate the internet, and of course you're #1 all in this region. But from what I understand, this isn't a local problem. This is something that's really a major problem everywhere.
It is, yeah, and I mean it's still good. Don't be afraid of renting. I mean, now's a great time to rent, and you got to enjoy the beach. And in fact, you know, we got a new zip lining.
I've heard.
Yeah, and it goes along with the parasailing and the new arcade and the kayaking. And I mean, there's so many fun things to do at the beach. Just do your research.
Yeah, research. So we there's always a few that are ruining it for everybody.
Yeah.
But in other words, do our research. Let's do our due diligence. And don't let a few bad apples spoil your fun, because it's a beautiful area and there's so much to do.
Yeah, and if you are one of those people where that happens to be your property, usually those sites that have that will have a report this listing and just say, hey, that's not the case, and they'll remove it. They're really good about that.
Right.
Okay.
Well, hey, great information. We appreciate you keeping us in the know. In the know. I'm tongue-tied after all that food yesterday. And we always love having you stop by. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to be back with entrepreneur and author of 2 Million Tears, Joseph T. Mongray. Stay with us, everybody. Don't go anywhere. Thank you. We had some hoots in the audience. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Joseph T. Mongray, everybody. Great seeing you. Have a seat, my friend. How have things been?
Been fine. Busy.
You know, we spoke on the phone probably almost a year ago.
Yes.
Is that right? Briefly.
Yes.
And that's kind of when a mutual friend introduced this story to me. And at that time, it's been almost in the back of my head. In fact, recently I asked, like, what happened about that story? And she's like, well, he's going to come on the show. And I kind of got bits and pieces and all that. And this morning we had a chance to kind of sit down and get into some specifics. And I have to say, the rest of the day it's really been heavy on my mind. Not in a bad way, but, you know, having a young child, myself right now, a 5-year-old, it really affects you. And the end is, it's a feel-good story. I mean, there's a great ending, but it's all true, and that's hard to believe at times. But, you know, I've listened to this, and I have to say, it's probably the most compelling inspirational story and story of survival that I've ever heard. What motivated you to write about it after so many years?
Curiosity is a story of strength and endurance, unlike anybody I've ever met.
Yeah.
And just, where do these people come from? Such as her.
Yeah. And when we say her, I guess it's okay. The main person we're going to be speaking of, the person that had such a great survival story.
Lone.
Lone.
Lone is her first name, Winsoon Lone.
And you know her pretty well.
Yes, fairly well, I would say.
And is it okay to talk about the relationship?
Oh, sure. We're married.
Yeah. So let me ask you a question. When you married her, did you have any idea that like she had this life before? I mean, it was just, or was it kind of like over dinner after a few months? It's like, what?
It's been a continual series of oh my gosh events, surprise after surprise. But the story drew me to her, and then chemistry finished the deal.
Sure.
Yes.
And the story really starts. I want to get this right. It begins on the western side of the South China Sea, really like the Philippine coastline.
Right.
And take us from there. Let's begin there and give us a little background, because the story covers a couple of generations.
Yes.
So talk a little bit about how it starts.
To understand the story, you have to go back to her family and her ties back to southern China and Southeast Asia, going back to about 1937 in the 1930s, when Japan invaded China at the beginning of the World War II. And from there, the history is of her mother, who at the time in 1937 was 11 years old, faced the Japanese incursion, which lasted until 1945, and then the takeover of mainland China by the communists and Mao Zedong, and that began more or less the kernel of this passion for remaining free and independent and earning and keeping what you earn, which was not the circumstance in 1940s China. And in a very brutal time, a lot of atrocities committed drove Loan's family out of China to North Vietnam. They were one of the few places of refuge was Southeast Asia. And like so many Chinese, became Chinese Vietnamese. First in North Vietnam, and then it became, as Vietnam fought its independence away from France as a colony, it became a communist state. And so once again, they're on the move to South Vietnam. And so across about 20 years, they suffered a great number of atrocities, difficulties, and finally settled in South Vietnam as more or less their last place of refuge.
Well, and in the book, and I know there's a trilogy, because it's a big story and it's an amazing story, but there was particularly an 8-year-old girl, Loan, traveling with another family and then wound up on the jungle coastline. How did that come about?
Well, through the Vietnam War, a series of tragic events within the war, but by the time the war was lost as the Americans knew it, and then for the Vietnamese, basically the Chinese Vietnamese were persecuted, and they conducted basically an artificial famine, and she was traded initially at the age of 7 for 200 kilos of rice to feed her large number of brothers and sisters.
Which actually was 23 children, is that right?
Well, 17. There's a number of other children.
Oh, just 17. Okay.
So just 17 children.
17 and then half brothers and sisters.
Half brothers, 11 blood, and 6 half blood in her immediate family, and then other half brothers and so forth elsewhere, nearby in the same neighborhood.
And interesting, when they traded her, originally it was supposed to be, was it the older sibling?
Yes.
And because it was such a dire situation in terms of not having enough food, at 7 she said, let me go.
She said, let's go, knowing she would eat better, working as more or less as a servant or a slave, if you will, for a prominent communist family.
Right.
And she knew she would eat better.
So she's, let's get to, so she did that for, was the original agreement was what, a year?
A year in exchange for 200 kilos of rice.
Right.
And then return home, and then the contract was renewed.
Right.
And so that normally was around the New Year's, Chinese New Year's, in the beginning of the year, typically January or February. And then she returned to that family for another year's of servitude.
And let's talk a little bit about Loan's mom. Because I find that part of the story as incredible as anything else. But she was actually trained at a certain point.
Yes. Well, in training is a funny term, but they had faced such a long series, decades, of atrocities by the communists, and they were victims of a terrible circumstance. And so they eventually more or less became freedom fighters of a sort, but they were just basically citizens who rejected the control of their resources.
Right.
And so she most focused on removing this threat, this socialism that was taking away their property.
Right. And she did have somebody that actually kind of showed her.
Her father, who actually, he worked for the police in mainland China.
Which there wasn't very many things you could do. You were either going to be in police or
something else. And what drove him out of China when he became a policeman after World War II, he as a policeman, his basic job was beheading property owners and people with Western influence.
Right.
And he tired of the beheadings.
Right.
And that forced him down toward North Vietnam initially.
Right.
But he had a lot of training, unfortunately, doing very unpleasant things.
Yeah, sure. And this guy, he's no slouch. This is somebody you don't want to mess with. But
no.
His whole job was beheading people. And so she was trained, and I know at some point she was used for specific
Yes.
things.
Well, what she gained because of her business, and she did not have just one business, she had many, but because she had built a special access to the communist forces that were in hiding around South Vietnam, she knew where they were. And so she, having the resources she had to conduct the fight, eventually it became available to her to contact the United States, who had a counterinsurgency group, basically the CIA, in an operation called Phoenix, where they brought in the local Vietnamese to help them locate the enemy. Well, she became an informant and a guide to U.S. Navy SEALs during the Phoenix program during the American part of the Vietnam War.
Yeah, and I know her dad said that, she'd have these guys come over late at night after everybody was sleeping, and she'd go outside and conduct, talk and whatever. And he thought, like, what kind of a gal did I raise? Because she's always talking to these strange men, not knowing that she had this other secret life where she's basically helping with ops.
And more particularly, her husband was kept in the dark because secrets got people killed if you expose them. So for years, he thought she was having nefarious affairs with Americans or South Vietnamese military. But what she was doing was coordinating her next event in the Phoenix operation.
Well, I want to take a quick break, but when we come back, I want to talk a little bit about some of the type situations that Lone's mom got into, as well as kind of what happened where Lone had to actually survive by herself in the jungle. Stick with us. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. You will not want to miss it. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm here with Joseph, and I wanted the story. We were talking about Lone's mother, and she's doing ops with these very dangerous missions, and we had talked briefly about one particular one where 2 assassins were actually sent to take her out.
Yes.
And at the time, she was 7 months pregnant as well. Talk a little bit about that.
Yes, in the fall of 1967, they moved from community to community every few months to stay ahead of discovery because she was significant intelligence for the Navy SEALs. Well, eventually her track record was catching up with her, and there said 2 young Viet Cong cadre. And these are young men that were recruited at the age of 12 and trained without much else besides just to do their assignment.
Sure.
But they hesitated because of the Asian respect, incredible respect and reverence for family and motherhood. But they ambushed her, and she was rolling a bicycle full of her product that she peddled, and they confronted her, and basically it pushed her down against her own bicycle and were pressing her, asking her if she was the person who was doing all this.
And she knew why they were there. She knew there's no way out of the situation.
They were there to kill her.
Right.
And they hesitated, and as they pressed on her, they had their guns slung behind their backs and pressed on her. And before they killed her, she had 2 knives underneath, beside her breast, underneath her blouse, and she pulled them out and basically slit their throats in one motion.
Yeah.
And dropped one and did dead immediately, and the other one she had to do a few more things, but killed them.
Well, and so that kind of tells you what type of person or how tough Lone's mother was. And again, she knew she was in this predicament where it was a life or death situation. Yes. And but again, they hesitated because they thought, wait a minute, this might not be her. She's 7 months pregnant, and of course, she was able to get out of the situation. So let's go now. Lone had been traded for food, and the year was up, and then she was supposed to return. And I guess there was a part where she was supposed to be going by boat.
Yes.
And then she got in a very precarious situation. Tell us very briefly kind of what was happening on the raft.
She had been returned after a few weeks, returned for another year's work. And within a week, the mother of the family told her she had to return to Saigon and gave her a wad of cash to leave. Lone had been eating well with his family for a year and pleaded and basically put on a tantrum she would not leave. So finally, the mother relented and told her they were returning to Saigon by boat. And so in the dark of night, a few hours later, at 2 in the morning, they loaded up on a boat and headed out, thinking that she was headed back to Saigon to return to her mother.
And there was, what, nearly 100 people?
104 people on this boat, according to her account.
And no one could swim because that's kind of the culture.
Back at that time, it was just swimming was not necessarily a necessity. Very few Asians swam well. And so the boat headed to the Philippine coast, and as it approached the coastline, in heavy seas on that end of the sea, of South China Sea, the boat began to break up. It was overloaded. It was not appropriate for heavy seas, and it broke up and began to sink. And not knowing anything else to do but to grab a piece of lumber, something to hold on to, the boat sank very quickly. And everybody that she knew drowned very, they could not swim. And
so there was no survivors?
No survivors. She was the only one that she knew of. And she grabbed a hold of a plank of wood and basically floated for another day into the Philippine coastline.
And how old did you say she was at this point?
She's 8 years old.
Yeah. So she's in the water for a day and a half, and then miraculously, gets washed up on these rocks. And these 2 young girls, they were
11 and 13.
And they were survivors also, naked.
Yes, they were there. They were there about 8 months before, similar survival, and they found her on the shoreline, thinking she was another dead person on the shoreline.
Yeah. And so the story, really goes on and on, because there was a time where there were so many bodies washing up that there was wild dogs, there was boars that would come eat the body. So they were constantly in fear for their lives. I know one time even had to fight off wild dogs. Then they were also under this scrutiny from different people that were coming in that area as well. So they were constantly hiding. I know during this time you had told me that she was on a steady diet of different grasses, crickets.
Yes, and fruits, native fruits, but a cricket was just as good as an apple if she could find it.
And the 2 young girls that she was with, one actually fell through a hole. Yeah. 11 or 12 years old.
Yeah. She's about 13 years old. About a year into together, she fell down a deep ravine and died. And so it just left the 2 of them.
And then the other one, not far after that, had her head split open.
Right. Fell in a stream. A big rock cut her head open, and she died, leaving alone for about 15 more months before she found her way out.
Yeah, and unfortunately, there's so much to this story. It's such a compelling story, but obviously, Lone's mother never thought, probably my child died, and Lone had this will of one day I'm still gonna fight. I'm gonna live in the jungle by myself. I'm gonna do whatever I have to do because I'm gonna see my mom again. Yes, and I'm gonna let her know that I made it.
Yes.
Right, and there's so many things, and of course, so much after that, being trained by the mafia, and it's on and on. But I'll tell you, it's such a compelling story, and it really says a lot about the person you are as a successful entrepreneur to be able to take this in, and I see why you had when you found out about the story, you were compelled to put the story out there.
Yes.
It's so much. And please, when the trilogy is out, when can we expect the first book? Do you have any idea?
October this year.
October of this year. Please come back and tell us a little bit more. Guys, that's our show. Joseph T. Mongray, everybody. And, amazing story. Give him a hand. And we'll have him back, I promise. And that's our show. Don't forget to get involved in your local community and be forgiving of others. Good night, everybody. Hi, I'm Dan Vega, and thank you for watching our channel. I want to take a second to tell you about a resource that's helping thousands of people across the country, Blue University. Blue University is the premier online business school for entrepreneurs and business leaders. If you find yourself in a day-to-day grind where you've lost your joy, or you're just tired of struggling, then check out blue.university. That's BLU.university. I can promise that you receive nothing short of a multi-million-dollar education. And if you want a completely different life in 3 to 6 months and a way to create wealth in 5 years or less, then again, check it out. That's blu.university. Find out why blue is the new color of success. Also, make sure to subscribe to this channel or to give us a good rating, but that's only if you see value. And when you do receive value, make sure to share it with someone else. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.